a lot of these things that are happening are for the sole purpose of creating division. In fact, last week in a Bible study that I have at a local church and going through the book of Romans, we were in chapter 13, and we started talking about the passage that says, "Make no provision for the flesh, but put on the Lord Jesus Christ, that you may not obey the desires of the flesh." Essentially, I probably got that wrong there, but it's anyway. It's like Romans 13:14, I think it is. Put on the Lord Jesus Christ, that you may make no provision for the flesh, to gratify the lust therein. I think that's the verse. But in that whole section there, we started talking about the sins that Paul mentions, and then the context in which the Romans had to deal with this. And so it's not all that dissimilar than the social context that we're in today, where kind of everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes. You've got temptations and different lusts and desires and materialism and consumerism, all these things kind of coming at us. And one of the ways that I mentioned in that Bible study that it's coming at us pretty heavily is digitally. Technology is making an avenue to bring kind of sins into our path that we wouldn't otherwise be exposed to. Maybe that's the way to say it. And that ultimately would include AI and some of the things that are going to be happening with it, with the replacement of jobs, at least allegedly, and the overwhelming desire for the creators of AI to create a god, something that they can worship. So in that setting, we started talking about kind of the social media, the division that's being created. And someone brought up the fact that they thought that with all of the divisions that have happened over the last 20 to 25 years, and by that we mean divisions between race, divisions between class, etc., they mentioned that they thought that the next, or the rising division, next one to come up, would be between the generations. And I said, well, funny you should mention that, because that's already happening. And if you are in the social media sphere, which I actually don't recommend, it's just a cesspool, really. I mean, reality is, I think I saw a stat that said, only a small percentage of the population are even on X, and I guess it would be probably considered one of the largest social media platforms. And so really the majority of the world is unplugged from there. And someone like Elon might say, well, then you're not plugged into the news. No, you're not plugged into the manipulation. You're not plugged into the cesspool and just the filth that goes on back and forth there. But anyway, this generational divide has already taken place. And you can see that if you've seen anything going on in social media, where you've got the younger generations like Millennials and Gen Z that are referring to the boomer generation, right? Like, this was big a year or two ago, really. Everything was placed on all the blame for what we have happening in today's society was placed at the feet of the boomer generation. They're the ones who are responsible for the financial mess that we're in. They, kept all their money to themselves. They worked, and now they have beach houses, and they're, picking up seashells, and they didn't leave any money to us, and all they did was spend and all this stuff. And it's like, dude, listen. The society's problems are not placed at the feet of one generation. It's systematic. Everybody has a share in the blame, okay? There's a lot of different things, a lot of different moving parts, and it didn't start with the boomer generation. It didn't. Anyway, that divide that fracture that started to happen between those generations, and Gen X was kind of sitting on the sidelines for this. We're kind of like shaking our head like, what's going on? Like, what's happening here? Like, Millennials and Gen Zs are trying to take down the boomer generation? Like, that's our parents. What are they talking about? And you've seen this manifested most recently with the divide over Israel. Okay, so that's not organic either. That's something that's starting to gain speed, because the Millennial and Gen Zs, those are the people who grew up knowing nothing but the internet. They grew up, in essentially the carriage or the crib with the internet attached to their hip via phones and screens and that sort of thing. Gen X, we grew up, we still had to get up to change the channel, right? Like, we still using rabbit ears and black and white TV, and we kind of came into this digital age when we were adults. But the Millennials and the Gen Zs, they're coming into this from birth. So that's the generation that starts to see things a little bit differently and starts to notice how they can push back online against the older generation, the boomer generation, that they were disconnected from to start with. It might be their grandparents, and I wouldn't deny that the boomer generation is disconnected from their grandchildren for whatever reason. I don't really get that, but so from the younger generation's perspective, it makes sense that they would try to push back, but there needs to be some clarity brought to them. There needs to be some wisdom. That older generation needs to be the one that's teaching the Millennials and the Gen Zs. But you're seeing this fracture on the basis of Israel that's taking place, because by and large, the boomer generation, they're the ones who grew up in an evangelical culture and in a political culture where support for Israel went hand in hand with patriotism and being an American. And it was grounded in theology for sure, but then also politics, coming into the rise of the moral majority in the late 70s, early 80s, and Reaganism mixed with Jerry Falwell, who was president founder of Liberty University. So that even Gen X, we were kids when all of that sort of started happening. So we didn't see it. We grew up in it, but we weren't adults when all of this was taking place like the boomers were. So by and large, their theology was shaped and framed in a post-Billy Graham environment where support for Israel was all that they knew, and American flags on the stage of the church, on the stage where the pulpit is, an American flag on one corner, maybe a Christian flag on the other, is all that they knew. So it went hand in hand. This was most represented, most typical by the interview that you may have seen between Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson. Ted Cruz being more of the boomer generation that would reflect an unwavering support for Israel, but not knowing why. So when he was pressed on it in the interview, to ask why this support for Israel, he said, when I went to Sunday school, I was taught that based on the Bible, that there was a verse that says, if you bless Israel, God will bless you, and if you curse Israel, God will curse you. And then he was asked, well, where does that occur? And Ted Cruz says, I don't know, but it's in the Bible somewhere. I don't have it memorized. Well, it's in Genesis, and it's Genesis 12, 1 through 3. And it really, in context, doesn't have anything to do with Israel, but it has everything to do with Abraham, and specifically the faith of Abraham. I've got a blog post written on this. It's at my old blog, Voice of Truth blog, and it's called the verse on which support for modern Israel hinges. I'm going to pull that over to the new blog website, familypulpit.com. So if you haven't checked that out, go ahead and subscribe. I'm trying to have posts regularly, and Ezra is trying to post, and then also my daughter is working on a few devotional type, shorter, I want to say stories, but kind of short story style devotion, we might say. So check that out if you haven't already. But in that interview, you kind of start to see this divide, and I get it. Tucker Carlson's not boomer. He's representing the Gen X. I already had a podcast questioning him. That's the last note from the pulpit. Said he is not a change agent, but what Tucker does is he realizes there's a truth vacuum, that there's a vacuum of truth that was created after COVID. Basically, institutional trust was thrown out, and everyone starts to question everything. And so Tucker realizes that the more that he throws to the wall, the more things will stick, and the more interest that he'll get from folks. So in that interview, you kind of see that divide that takes place, but it's not limited to Ted Cruz. It's a generational divide, like I mentioned, that happened. We talked about it in that Bible study last week. It's already taken place. It's a division, and ultimately, at its heart, what you're going to see is in this generational divide is it's going to divide conservatism. That's the goal here. You want to split up evangelicals. You want to divide them over issues that are they important? Yes. But do they define or are they division worthy, right? Like, are they gospel division worthy? Are they frontline division questions that would separate people other than the basis for the gospel? No, but they're using it that way. And so not only will it split evangelicalism, but it's going to split conservatism, and it allows them to move and shuffle people like a big sort, like what keeps happening, and put people into these stovepipe piles, because then they're more easily manipulated. You can do a big sort where you gather people together and you split them up over an issue, and then you resort them and reshuffle them, and that division creates animosity, it creates distrust, it creates hatred, and that's the way that people get manipulated and taken over because of division. So what